Amira was no stranger to hardship. At 22, she carried the weight of her family's survival on her fragile shoulders. Her father, once a respected poet, had been silenced by illness, and her mother toiled endlessly sewing garments for meager pay. The roses Amira sold were grown in their tiny backyard, each petal a fragile hope for a better day. But hope was running thin, and the hospital bills were piling up. This morning she'd prayed for a miracle. Now, a millionaire named Khalid Al-Mansour stood before her, his challenge hanging in the air like a dare. Khalid was a man who thrived on control. A tech mogul who'd built an empire in Dubai. He was visiting Damascus to close a deal, but boredom had led him to the market. He enjoyed these games, throwing out impossible challenges to watch people squirm. "Speak Arabic," he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "Not the broken dialect of the streets. Pure poetic Arabic, like the old masters. Impress me, and the money's yours." The crowd murmured, some laughing, others pitying the girl who looked like she'd never heard of classical Arabic, let alone spoken it. Amira's hands trembled, but not from fear. She'd grown up on her father's poetry, his voice weaving tales of love and loss under lantern light. She knew the language of the old masters, Fuchsia, the Arabic of poets and scholars. But doubt gnawed at her. What if she failed? What if this was just another rich man's prank? She glanced at the roses, their scent grounding her, and made a choice. She would not let this moment slip away. "Very well," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "But I'll sell you more than roses. I'll sell you their story." The crowd hushed. Khalid raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. Amira lifted a single rose, its petals catching the sunlight. "This rose," she began in flawless fuchsia, her words flowing like a river, "was born of soil kissed by dawn, tended by hands that have known both joy and sorrow. Its roots drink from the tears of my mother, who sows until her fingers bleed, and its thorns carry the weight of my father's unspoken verses trapped in a body that betrays him." Khalid's smirk faltered. Her Arabic was not just correct, it was mesmerizing, each syllable a brushstroke painting a world he'd forgotten. Amira continued, her voice rising and falling like a melody. "This rose is not just a flower, it is a promise, of hope that blooms in the cracks of despair, of love that endures when all else fades. Buy this rose, sir, and you buy a piece of a family's heart." The crowd was silent, some wiping tears, others nodding as if her words had unlocked memories of their own struggles. Khalid, however, stood frozen, his eyes locked on Amira. For the first time in years, he felt something stir, a memory long buried. He saw himself as a boy in a village not unlike this market, where his own mother sold bread to survive, her hands rough but her stories soft, woven in the same poetic Arabic Amira now wielded. But Khalid wasn't ready to yield. "Pretty words," he said, regaining his composure. "But I asked for a sale, not a performance. Convince me why I should care about your roses, or your family." His tone was sharp, testing her resolve. Amira's heart sank. She sensed the game wasn't over. She thought of her father, bedridden, whispering poetry to keep his spirit alive. She thought of her mother, who'd once dreamed of being a teacher but now stitched in silence. And she thought of herself, how she'd almost given up on dreams of studying literature, of becoming more than a girl selling flowers. This was her moment to fight. "Sir," she said, stepping closer, her eyes fierce, "you may buy empires with your wealth, but can you buy meaning? These roses are not just mine. They belong to every soul in this market who fights to live, to love, to dream. If you cannot see their value, then no amount of money can buy the heart to understand them." The crowd erupted in murmurs of awe. Khalid's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by a girl who looked like she had nothing. But her words cut deeper than he'd expected, stirring a guilt he'd long suppressed. He remembered his mother's stories, how they'd kept him grounded before ambition consumed him. He saw Amira's fire and recognized a strength he'd lost. "Enough," he said, raising a hand. The crowd held its breath. "You've sold me the roses." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a checkbook. $100,000 as promised. He scribbled the amount, but as he handed it to Amira, he added, "But I want more. I want your story, your family's story. I'll fund your father's treatment and your education. In return, you'll write, Write the poetry of this market, of these people. Share it with the world. Amira's knees nearly buckled. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, clutching the check as if it might vanish. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help us?" Khalid's voice softened, almost breaking. "Because you reminded me of who I was before I forgot how to listen. Your words, they brought me back." The crowd burst into applause, some cheering, others weeping. Amira stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. She'd come to the market hoping to sell enough roses for a week's medicine. Now, she held a future she'd never dared imagine. Resolution and message that day marked a turning point. Khalid kept his word, funding Amira's father's treatment and her enrollment in a literature program at Damascus University. Amira began writing, her poetry capturing the soul of the market, its struggles, its beauty, its resilience. Her words spread, first through local papers, then online, inspiring countless others to find their voice. Khalid, too, changed. He returned to his village, rebuilding schools and supporting artisans, rediscovering the joy of giving without expectation. The story of Amira and the roses became a legend in Damascus, a reminder that courage and authenticity can move even the hardest hearts. For Amira, it was proof that a single moment of bravery could rewrite a life. And for those who heard her story, it was a call to never underestimate the power of their own voice, no matter how small they felt. Inspiring message as the sun set over the market, Amira looked at her roses, now just a few left in her basket. They were more than flowers. They were her strength, her story, her triumph. And so, the message rang clear. In the face of mockery or doubt, speak your truth. Your words, your heart, your story. They hold the power to change the world, one rose at a time.